If you have a cell phone or pager, if you could turn it to the silent mode. Officiating today is Rabbi Shoshana Conover and Cantor Shira Ben David.
So we are here, of course, to remember our beloved Harvey. And when I sat with Barbara and John and Julie and Dana and Dean and their kids, I got to hear so many stories about Harvey that it felt like he was sitting right there with us. And he loomed so lovingly large with his perfectly coiffed, eternally blonde hair, his immaculately chosen clothes dapper and debonair, his face lighting up because we were all in the room and taking care, well, as much as she'll let us, of his beloved Barbara. Harvey was with us as we talked about the late night television ads of him that we stayed up to watch when we were kids. Who could forget the iconic ads for Harvey L. Walner and Associates? Or the way he loved his clients and would sit with them in their worst moments with kindness and empathy. Or how he got in trouble with Barbara for his ever-expanding rotation of fancy cars, which she forgave him for because he joined her in collecting beautiful art and going to opera and loving her huge, chaotic, wonderful family of Friedmans. And then he and Barbara created their own loving Walner clan, raising the most magnificent children, John and Keith of blessed memory and Dana, who in turn found life partners whom Harvey took in as his own, and let's just be honest, sometimes loved them more than his own kids. He had a beautiful relationship with Julie and with Dean, and they, in turn, have raised the most magnificent children as well, Tony and Joey and Isabel and Tatum and Chase. And when we sat together last night, I think he got a kick out of all the stories we shared about him. But even as it felt like Harvey was sitting with us then, I wanted to make sure that today we would capture what Harvey himself would want most shared about him. So I asked the family that question when we sat together. But then I got home and I realized that actually I did not need to ask them this because already it was perfectly captured in the very first line of Harvey's obituary, which, to be honest, I hadn't read beforehand because I know this family so well and I love them so dearly. But now if I had read it, I would have realized that I could not say anything today that Harvey would like more than the opening line of his obituary. Harvey L. Walner, 88, of Chicago, ringer for Robert Redford. Maybe the only thing he would like more would be Harvey L. Walner, a ringer for yet still better looking than Robert Redford. And for those of you who go to Sundance with John and Julie, Harvey wouldn't mind if you tell Mr. Redford that next winter. The loss of our Harvey, who was audacious in business and in his life, and so funny and good-natured and kind, who persevered even after his stroke to brighten every day we were with him, it's just so hard to let him go. One consolation we pray is that he's reunited with his son, our incredible Keith. And we feel Harvey's presence, and we will feel it certainly at Chase's graduation and at Tony and Sarah's wedding. We'll feel him cheering on Dana's every move with Dean and their children, and still criticizing John's golf game, deservedly so. Yet loving every move John makes. Listen to this part, John. Loving every move you make with Julie and your children, and of course, how John interacts with his clients with empathy and integrity, which is part of Harvey's beautiful legacy. We sing now the words of Psalm 23, and we're reminded that as we remember Harvey in this valley, in the shadow of his death, we never walk alone.
Adonai roi lo echsar bino tesher bitzeni al mei menuchot yenaleni. Nafshi yeshovev, yancheni v'maglei tzedek, yancheni v'maglei tzedek, leman shemo. Adonai roi lo echsar, Adonai roi lo echsar.
Together, the 23rd Psalm, which is translated in your program. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The psalmist asks, Adonai, who may abide in your house? Who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not wrong others or bring shame upon them, who honor those who revere this world, who give their word and come what may do not retract, who do not exploit others or take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. Our Harvey persevered with such dignity and with such love. And today, his children-in-law who were like his own children, and his grandchildren will remember him beautifully. So we invite now to come up to share John and Dana and their partners, Julie and Dean.
First, I want to thank everyone for being here. Our whole family is grateful that you came today to honor my dad and comfort our family. We've all been overwhelmed with gratitude from all your texts, emails, phone calls, and all the special, meaningful letters that you've given to me personally. I'm truly touched by that, and I thank you. And, before we get started, sharing our thoughts about my father, I want to mention that 2025 has gotten off to a rough start for our family. Our cousin Kathy Friedman has just passed away less than 2 weeks ago. I have 26 first cousins. My mom's a baby of 7, so that's, very sad for our family. Our large family is very important to Kathy, and even though she didn't live in town, she made a point to be present. To our family, be well connected. I wish my brother was here today. And if he were here, he'd have a million funny stories to share about my dad, and we've had a lot of laughs. The two of them were often cahoots. My dad, we'll miss him every day, and Keith was very, very close to my dad, and they were, both full of message, and a little bit of insanity together. My dad was born in 1936, and his mom Estelle died when he was 4 years old. He grew up at 436 South Coster on the west side. And because my grandpa's English wasn't quite perfect, he spoke Yiddish and Polish, that he relied on my dad to help communicate with his customers on his installment sales routes. My dad went to Austin High School on the west side until they were forced to move when the Congress Expressway was built. Then they moved from West Rogers Park when my dad finished high school at Sen, which was very special to him. And my grandparents, after my dad died, his mom died when he was 4. 4 years later, my grandfather William went to New York to find a wife. Found Estelle, who's my grandmother. We always consider my grandmother. My grandmother always considered my dad her son, Elsie Walner. Thanks, Jules. And, their house, then they moved to 7036 Rockwell in West Rogers Park across from Indian Boundary Park, and that's where me, Keith, and Dana, of course, would always visit my grandparents there. It was beautiful, the zoo, the tennis courts, the fountain to swim in, and made my dad very happy when we come visit his dad and mom. It was very important to him that we stay close, and I know many of you knew my dad and would agree with me that he was definition of larger than life. But some of you didn't get a chance to know my dad prior to 1998, and I want to share with you why he was one of a kind to other people, one of a kind to me. When he went to join the Army, he found out that he had a heart defect and he couldn't enlist. He had heart surgery in 1968 when my mom was pregnant with Dana. In order to get healthy and strong, he started exercising with a man named Dick White. He played for the Detroit Lions and the White Warriors at the Lawson YMCA on Chicago Avenue near State Street. My Uncle Dave, his father Nancy, and Dave Pochis. His kids are here, and my Uncle Dave and my dad, alongside with famous athletes like Dick Gordon, Gail Sears, George Seals, Chet Walker, Doug Buffone, all worked out with Dick White at the YMCA. And he was lucky to also represent some of those athletes as their agent. He never stopped working out, and he did it large, running, lifting, playing racquetball, swimming, even after he had a stroke. He kept up his swimming on his back. My mom had a pool in her house, and in Arizona, they had a pool, and he swam on his back to rehab. It's the only thing he can do, because he had no feeling on the right side of his body. But he made the best of it, and he continued to stay healthy. He knew that was important, and he felt better. And a weekend before, too, my dad's stroke, my mom and dad hiked to the bottom of Grand Canyon. They stayed at the Phantom Ranch, climbed back up. It's such a difference between my dad prior to the stroke and after. It's very hard to, wrap my arms around that. And just want to say that even after his stroke, for his strength and his balance, he continued to work out. It was very important to him. And the sport he loved most was golf. That was a big part of his life. And he took up golf in his 30s, and nobody was more passionate about golf than my dad. My mom and dad were original members of Hillcrest Country Club, where he eventually became its president. He didn't miss a competitive golf money game. He loved taking lessons, and the more famous the pro, the better, from Dave Pells, Jim Flick, Davis Love Sr., John Revolta, Peter Costas, to name a few. And that passion for golf wore off on me. Some of my favorite memories of golfing with my dad alone and his friends, with the Dogs Night Out group. He took me to play Cypress and Pebble, Doral, a ton of other world-class golf courses. Shared a lot of laughs, a lot of insanity with the Dogs group, and those are, memories I'll treasure forever. We even played in Kenya. My dad took me to Kenya. He wanted to play golf, so we played in Nairobi. He loved participating in pro-ams, and he played with Seve Ballesteros. He played with Evel Knievel, and he played with Tom Lehman. And the last round of golf we played together was a father and son golf tournament at Estancia, where I was explicitly told on every hole that we lost that was absolutely my fault. We had such dreams of winning that tournament. Didn't go our way. So, after my dad's stroke, he came to watch me in the two-man best ball at Idlewild, and Evan Silverman's here. He came to the line, and that was one of the last times my dad could sit in a golf. He didn't have good balance, and Evan Silverman and I at Idlewild Country Club won the two-man best ball. My dad sat in a cart, and he saw that, and it was awesome. And my dad was in for me. My dad always took caddies. He was so good to the caddies. Everywhere he played, they took special shock in the money he was playing for and the competitive nature. I'm sure they got abused badly. But all the caddies that work for my dad, they always have a cute story. No matter where I am at what club, they always say, "Hey, John, I remember caddying for your dad. He was such a special man, and I'm lucky to have known him." My dad loved golf. He also loved taking me along, and I treasure all the moments we had together. I like to point out that at the beginning in the 5th grade to the very end, he always had some tips about my swing, my short game, my putting. I'm still a work in progress. I don't four-putt anymore. My mom and dad had a wonderful group of friends. We have such fond memories of traveling with their friends and their children. We grew up with a ton of group. The people who here are the friends with my parents. We went with their children all over to Doral, to Acapulco, and Hawaii. This is like continuing from I was in 3rd grade through college. We went with the same group to those travel destinations. My dad traveled larger than life too, and my mom and my dad took amazing trips together to Turkey, to Greece, to Japan, Africa, India, South America, Australia, New Zealand, and the list goes on. And jumping back a bit in time, my dad met my mom when they couldn't keep their eyes off of each other at Oak Street Beach. We know how handsome and charismatic my dad is, and my mom instantly fell for him. My dad was an only child. My mom was the youngest of 7, so my dad was suddenly part of an enormous family, and he loved it. He truly cherished his 12 new brother and sisters-in-laws and all his nieces and nephews. And back to my dad, over-the-top good looks. He was, as his son, you always look up to your father. Look at my dad like, whoa, who's this guy? And when I was a freshman in high school, I walked into Spanish class. It was the day after the parents' opening house, and my teacher, Mrs. Shilgan, She said, she said, I want to announce the class. Is Mr. Friedson here? Is Mr. Walner here? I'm like, yeah? Thinking this is for sure more trouble. That your dads are the most handsome men that I have ever laid my eyes on. I mean, that had to go a long way to my A, for sure. Little setup after. And back to another time when I was a bit younger, one of my neighbors came over to me and asked if that was Robert Redford she just saw leaving our house in a red Ferrari. Speaking of cars, my dad did that larger in life too. You name the car he had it. He had 4 Ferraris, one faster than the other. My dad loved the finer things in life, and that, of course, extended to his wardrobe. He loved clothes so much as he loved golf. He was one of the best-dressed men you'd ever seen. And when my dad graduated, then when my dad went to law school, he graduated from DePaul Law School, I think in '61. He opened his own practice with his good friend David Rosner. David Rosner was also our next-door neighbor on Stonegate. And then David Rosner went his own way, opened an insurance company in Florida, and my dad founded Harvey L. Walner and Associates Limited. It is, most of you know, I've worked there since 1988, and I'm still sane. The psychiatric visits, those have ended. My dad's office wasn't your typical office. That's just how my dad did things. It was full of characters of all walks of life. There was a fair amount of screaming, mostly at me. A fair amount of swearing, again, mostly at me. But there were a lot of laughs. Tons of parties with a crew of characters that made up our office. And it was fun. It was great going to work. It was funny. It was a blast. I saw Debbie, Crystal, and Judy. Rochelle. My dad loved when Rochelle came to the office. She would sing. He made her sing. It was just fun. And, you know, Honey's here. Honey was with my dad for 54 years. Worked for my dad when she was 18 years old. And I see Janet Dash, she was here, and Bob worked for my dad forever. And there was a lot of great work got done. In the end, we acted seriously with respect, empathy, and gave hope to all the clients that we represented. We helped our clients, obviously, at the most challenging time of their lives. And he always put his clients first. He loved the clients. He loved them, and they loved him. And he connected with them so easily. Sharing stories about growing up on the West Side, he'd always, talk about the West Side to him. And he would always ask, is this store still there? And they would look at him like, what? How do you know the West Side? And as a testament to my dad, a lot of people came to work for him. They never left. His office manager, and Honey, we talked about, was there for 58 years, and those others for 20 or 30 years, including Judy Kryzak, Pepper Canaris, Joe King, Sheldon Minkow, John Perry. My dad has probably trained over 100 young lawyers who went on to have wonderful careers. My dad always said when he left, he would give them, like 100 files, 200 files. And when I see them, they're always grateful. They were always grateful to have had a larger-than-life Harvey story to tell me and to share with me, and I was grateful and blessed for that. And my dad loved so many things. He lived life to the fullest every day. He loved opera. He loved Streisand and Sinatra. He loved musicals, especially West Side Story, Fiddler on the Roof. He loved being Jewish. He loved to sing. He loved to eat, mostly things that were horribly unhealthy. With my mom yelling at him, please, God, Harvey, please stop eating all those crazy things. He loved to laugh. One of my favorite memories of Julie and I took him to see Jackie Mason. He loved that. And we loved to see him howling, at every joke. And that was, just heartwarming for me to see him laugh and enjoy someone that embodied, the Jewish life that he grew up on and the humor that Jackie Mason, how he made fun of us as a people. And that was great. But my dad's love went far beyond everything else. And that was his family, me, my mom, Keith, Dana, Julie, Dean, and his 5 grandchildren. Never stopped being at the center of his life and being more important than anything else in the world to him. We all felt his enormous capacity to love us. And that love was a special gift and a blessing that we'll treasure forever. Thanks.
I first met Harvey in 1985 when I was 22. I instantly loved him, and that never stopped. It wasn't lost on me that Harvey was larger than life, but what I noticed most was that he welcomed me with open arms, and it was always, always fun to be in Harvey's orbit. Shortly after I married John, he invited me to go to the opera with him. I had never been, and I wasn't so sure that the whole thing was up my alley. I remember Harvey saying to me that it was okay to fall asleep, but snoring was not looked kindly upon. That seemed fair enough. I could handle that until he didn't follow his own advice. And there we were, sitting like in the third and fourth row, because of course he does things big. We're right in the front, and he's snoring away. I remember him racing, and I mean that literally. You heard a little bit about his fast cars, to the hospital to meet Tony and Joey. And after they were born, and he never stopped being over the moon with them. On the very first night of Tony's first Hanukkah, Harvey called me to say that he's stopping by after work. He told me that we'd light the menorah together, and he picked up lackeys and some gifts for Tony. One of those gifts, a primary colored little tyke slide and play cube, was a huge hit with Tony and then with Joey and every single toddler Tony and Joey played with. Not sure how many grandpas would think of doing that all by themselves. And I dug this up while we were looking. So here we are, one candle in the menorah, Tony about 9 months old that night, and then I found the little tykes that we love to play with. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When Harvey had his stroke at 61, it was not easy. But Harvey continued to love being with his family, had a great attitude, and had the brightest, loving smile to greet us whenever we were together, which was often. He continued to love watching golf and the Bears on TV. He continued to love celebrating the Jewish holidays, birthdays, Father's Days, and Thanksgivings all together. And he still loved eating. Cashews, hard salami, corned beef, a Polish, hot dogs wrapped in dough, sausage and peppers, Italian beef, and ice cream. After Harvey's stroke, Keith and his dog Lucky moved from LA back to my in-laws' home and stayed by Harvey's side for an entire year, taking Harvey to rehab, bringing him to the office, taking him to visit friends and family. What a selfless, loving act for a son, and one of the most beautiful and meaningful things I've been privileged to witness. And a lot of good things happened over those next 26 years. Harvey got to see his beloved Dana marry his wonderful Dean, his son-in-law Dean. He was here to see the birth of Tatum, Isabel, and Chase. He celebrated all 5 of his grandchildren being bar and bat mitzvahed. Harvey was here to see 4 grandchildren graduate college and 1 graduate law school. He got to know and love Tony's fiancée, Sarah, and had the biggest smile on his face watching them practice their swing dancing. All in all, not so shabby. Harvey was fortunate to have dear friends who stayed in his life throughout thick and thin, and we want to especially thank the Simon clan, Joe King, Ed Lomax, Lloyd Stein, Mike Perlin, Eddie Miller, and my mom and dad. Barbara, thank you for making sure Harvey had loving care. You are our rock and are the reason Harvey was with us for so many of those happy milestones. We also want to thank Harvey's caregivers and Dr. Bennett for taking such good care of Harvey.
Okay. I have some good stories. But, first, Harvey was a legend, right? A legend. And I was so proud to have him as my father-in-law. I used to tell, everybody. I love telling people how Harvey Walner was my father-in-law. I love telling them how John Walner is my brother-in-law. He's another legend. I'm really happy and feel lucky that I did have a chance to meet him before he had the stroke. It was only, it was less than a year, I think, but it doesn't take long to bond with Harvey. Anyway, keep saying Harvey was larger than life. And, to me, he was larger than life before I even met him. Because I'm in New York, and I start dating Dana, and people keep coming up to me, and they would say, you know who her father is, right? And I'd be like, no, not really. And, they're like, he's a big deal. I'm like, okay. And then we scheduled a visit to Chicago to meet them. And, this started building over a while, and I could see that Dana was nervous, and I think I had told her that I'd never heard my father curse. And she was like, oh, no, it's not going to be like that. And then I would see her, I would catch her calling her mom, and she'd be like whispering in the phone. She's like, Mom, you have to talk to him. You have to talk to him. He's not used to this. She was so worried, and so now I'm getting worried. And then, and then we pull up to this big, beautiful house on the lake, and there's all these workers. There's people like washing his cars and, cleaning the windows. And I'm thinking like, I felt like I was like in The Godfather going to meet, Marlon Brando. But you know what? There was no reason to be nervous. From the moment I met him, I could tell right away that he was the man. He was like the greatest. He was like a movie star, not like a scary Godfather movie star, but like the cool Robert Redford type of movie star. It turned out I had like the whole thing backwards, and it was really Barbara that I needed to worry about. I love you, Barbara. I'm just kidding. But, so sure enough, Harvey wants to take me down to the beach. And so you had to kind of climb down. And so we're climbing down, and he falls and like scrapes his leg and lets out this like amazing burst of profanities. And I'm like, wow, this just gets better and better, right? And then another time I was playing golf with John and Harvey and Keith at Hillcrest, and John and Keith are giving Harvey a really tough time. But it was hilarious, right? I mean, they broke the mold on all this whole family. And so, but Harvey did eventually explode, throwing his soda on you in the sand trap. I remember I got back to Dana, and I'm like, so they actually work together? And she told me how her dad used to tell her that he fires John every day, but he just keeps showing up. All right, so once we moved to Chicago, people really started to catch on, about who my father-in-law. I would get the, wait, your father-in-law is Harvey Walner? Like, you're married to Harvey Walner's daughter? And I love it. And like I said, I'm incredibly proud that he was my father-in-law. I mean, at this point, I usually find ways to slip it into the conversation. They're like, how'd you wind up here? Well, I met her. We were in New York, but she's from Chicago. And so you know how it goes. We moved to Chicago. And my father-in-law's Harvey Walner. And 9 out of 10 times, you get a great reaction. And even all these years later, just a month ago, so I go to Frankie LaFranza, where I get my hair cut, where John and Harvey always went. And
Larry Brodsky used to go.
You don't go anymore, Larry? No. And Frank, there's a guy there getting his hair cut, a fancy-looking guy. I think he's getting his nails done and the whole thing, and I'm waiting. And Frankie goes, Dean, come over here. And he says to the guy, goes, you know who this is? This is Harvey Walner's son-in-law. And the guy jumps up. He's like, you're kidding. Oh, my God, Harvey Walner, he's the greatest guy. And Frankie, he told me he was like some Goldman Sachs big shot or something. I don't know, but everybody knew Harvey Walner. So one time, before we were even engaged, Harvey called me in New York, and I was home from work sick. And I was genuinely sick. I had like strep throat or something. I was definitely sick.
Not
and
hungover.
Right, I was not hungover. But he was not impressed. And he says to me, he goes, Dean, I've never missed a day of work in my life. He goes, you know why? Because I'm a fucking warrior. I wake up, I run, I swim, I lift weights, I shower, I go to work, I never get sick. He was a warrior, right? 27 years after that stroke, I never saw him give in. Always a smile, right? He was one of a kind. I wish my kids could have really known him. It wasn't too long after his stroke that I wanted to ask, their permission to propose to Dana and he was still in some rehab place in the city. And I went into a room with Harvey and Barbara. You know, it was a big moment, and Harvey's in the chair, and Barbara's behind him, and like squeeze, like turning purple. She's like squeezing his neck, you know, hugging him so tight, and you know, so I had like sort of a speech prepared, and I'm like, oh, I know you don't love that I'm not Jewish, but you know, I love her, I want to take care of her, you know, and all that, and he says, and Harvey stops, and he's like, he's trying to get the right. He can't. He was having trouble getting the right words out, so he's trying to get the right words out, and finally he says, and I'll never forget it. He goes, "You two will make great coffee despite your tea." You two will make great coffee despite your tea. You know, and I knew what he meant, and it was beautiful. Harvey's had nothing but love for me and my family. You know, I'm really going to miss him. Thanks. Okay.
I think you can see why my dad was our hero. We all wanted his attention. Even this past week, my nephew Joey asked who I thought was his favorite of his 3 kids. My brother John and I immediately pointed to ourselves. John said I was the firstborn. Of course it was me. I said I was the first girl, and seriously, you and Keith. So Joey said, let's ask Grandpa. I said, Dad, I was the favorite, right? He nodded yes. Mic drop. John then said, well, I was Grandpa Bill's favorite. You can have that one, John. In all seriousness, I always knew I was blessed to have my dad. He was smiles and laughter all the time. He made me laugh so much, he once told me with a perfectly straight face that if I flushed the toilet while sitting on the seat, I would sneeze out of my butt, followed by my mom saying, Dana, don't encourage him. He always had time for me, no matter what. If I called the office, he immediately picked up, even when clients were there. I would visit him at work and just walk right into his cool office. I was so proud of him. And he never said no to me and would do anything for me. When I told him I was moving to London for work, he said that he would buy me a convertible BMW, my dream car at the time, if I would stay in Chicago. I did go, and he was very proud of me, but he missed me and told me all the time. I didn't get the car, but no question he would have done that for me. When I was in the hospital for knee surgery in New York, he flew in and slept in my apartment on the pull-out couch. When he would come to the hospital, he would look at me and ask if he could eat the leftover food the hospital brought in. My mom yelling, Harvey, it's for Dana. And Dana, don't encourage him. He flew in again when I got meningitis. I was so sick, I could not stop throwing up. And he just looked at me in the hospital bed and smiled at me and said, I'm waiting for your head to start spinning around. I knew right then I would be okay. He had that effect on people. Dad loved and endured his grandchildren, along with his many nieces and nephews. My girls were born after my dad had his stroke. My brother John picked him up and flew him to New York, and he was in my room the next day. He sat there all day. Smiling with tears in his eyes, doing whatever he could do to show me how happy he was. I brought them home to Chicago at 6 weeks old to stand up at my best friend Jill's wedding. The girls shared a crib, and he just sat with them all day long, staring at them. More smiles and tears. When Chase was born, my mom was actually having her appendix out. He ditched her, and I was being brought into the recovery room. There was my dad, the first person to hold Chase even before Dean. More smiles and tears of happiness. Nothing could stop my dad from loving us all. My brother Keith wanted his car at Boulder, so Dad volunteered to drive it out and drafted me to come along. This was truly unconditional love from my dad, a 1,000-mile, 16-hour Keith Walner Grateful Dead marathon. He really tried, but finally my dad shut the music off and said, I can't take it anymore. Every song is the goddamn same. He then treated us to his made-up version of Grateful Dead songs, complete with air guitar, while my brother and I were crying laughing. You just could not get this guy down. What a great memory. Dad worked very hard and rarely left the office to eat. While I was working at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, I would force him to take me to lunch, and he always took me to his favorite spot, Lloyd's. On one of our lunches, as we were leaving, he fell down the stairs and he broke his wrist. Of course, his first thought was, oh God, what's gonna happen to my golf game? He was right, no more golf that summer. Since it was August and all his friends were at the golf course, I became his playmate. He took me everywhere and it was wonderful. We even went to a steamy Bears preseason game. The next weekend, he told me we were going to the museum. Which one? You'll know when we get there, and there'll be no talking. I wondered what museum is in the direction of Lake Forest, and we arrived at the Ferrari dealership. We walked in, and he said it was the most beautiful place in the world. Each one is a sculpture, priceless. I imagine my dad is with Keith now, causing trouble, playing golf with his friends while driving around in a Ferrari. We were blessed to have you, Dad. And as Keith said too, while we were on a ski trip, you did good, Dad. I love you.
Thank you so much. I'll invite now Tony and Joey and Tatum and Isabel and Chase.
This is from all of us. Our grandfather loved people. I have early memories of him watching golf with Mickey, with a phone pressed to his ear, big time beaming at whatever it is others had to say. He would light up when he would walk into a room. If we came over and weren't in his vicinity, he would scoot himself to where everyone congregated, either watching us swim in the pool or join at the kitchen table. There, we'd often share looks with Grandpa when, as Isabel put it, Uncle John would get carried away telling one of his stories. We've all been told hundreds of times how much he loved us. This is nice to hear, of course, but we've felt this our entire lives. He had Catherine cut out Tatum and Isabel's high school graduation photos in the Sun-Times, and subsequently turned down the frame that Catherine got at CVS, them not being quality enough for what was to go inside of them. His bathroom counter held an array of photos of us. At times, when cleaners came, Grandpa would sometimes get upset. When this happened, it was known what occurred. The photos had been rearranged and needed to be repositioned for how he had it set. On Mondays, when he was asked what he did over the weekend, he would point to these pictures. We felt this love, too, all the times he would kiss Chase farewell, saying, "Goodbye, kid." We've been told often of our grandpa's sense of humor. We know all about this. Once in high school, Grandpa rode along while Dad and I golfed. On the first tee, Dad asked Grandpa to watch my practice swing before I teed off. He watched the way I swung, looked up at me, and said, "Horrible." My dad, without waiting for me to actually hit the ball for real, and maybe a bit jealous of not getting more attention for himself, asked Grandpa to watch one of his swings as well. He swung, and Grandpa said, "Worst fucking thing I've ever seen." One of my dad's antics is lifting Joey's shirt up in front of others. He did this most recently, just days ago, in front of Grandpa at the hospital, asking Grandpa if he thought Joey should maybe exercise. Grandpa shook his head, and once again, horrible. We're grateful to have had the relationship that we've had with our grandpa. We're glad, too, to see him in our parents, uncles, aunts, in Keith's adventurousness, his penchant for naughtiness, John's boisterousness, Dana's warmth. We miss you, Grandpa, and we will all remember the most beautiful smile you had on your face every time that you saw us, and just how much you loved us all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, all the grandchildren, and thank you, Tony, for delivering that for everyone. I'll let you know that for the entire Jewish people, and not just for this beautiful family, this really is a time for memory. For 3 weeks in the Torah, we have heard about Moshe Rabbeinu, or Moses, our teacher, and leading up to this week when we experienced the greatest story of our people, the Exodus from Egypt. And we know this story so well because we retell it every spring at Passover. We want to make sure that we tell it again and again because we want these stories to be embedded in our children's memories as inspiration and hope in a world that can feel cold and sometimes even cruel. And if Harvey liked the comparison with Robert Redford, I hope he'll love the comparison to Moses. Because like Moses at birth, Harvey had humble beginnings and faced tragedy early in his life. And from there, he was able to take those bits of hardness and make them as great teachings for inspiration. You heard how his father would take him around town in the West Side in his installment business in Jewish neighborhoods and make sure that Harvey understood from this the lesson of kindness, the ways of understanding, and getting a strong work ethic. Harvey always had a job growing up, from selling shoes to air conditioning units, and thank God for Seymour Blum, an air conditioning man, who said, "You can't keep doing this, Harvey. There's something more for you." And so he guided him and mentored him. And so from there, Harvey went to Wright Junior College and then to Roosevelt U and finally to DePaul Law School. And I will say, just to put a little color on that story about Barbara and Harvey's meeting, Barbara, with your permission, well, you can imagine that it was, for both of them, at least being smitten at first sight. And I have to say that when they met each other, there was an old flame of Barbara's who was walking by, who said, "You guys should get married, you'd make beautiful children." And they did, eventually. But at the time, Barbara had a dilemma because she was engaged to someone else. But Harvey was persistent, and he knew how to impress. He took her out dancing, even though Harvey did not like dancing. And he gave her a book of philosophy, even though he never read it. And she was so impressed by this great dancer and smart, well-read man. And it didn't hurt that he had a Chevy Bel Air convertible that was white. And maybe those short shorts, Dana, did pay off a little bit. But still, Barbara was torn until her mother nudged her in just the right direction toward Harvey. And Barbara never looked back. They were married just 2 days after he graduated from DePaul, and a year later, John was born, and then Keith, and finally Dana. And I'll say that his background made him an incredible injury lawyer because he cared about his clients so deeply. He loved going to them. He was truly, as John said of him, a man of the people. And he knew what it was like to be poor. And so he was able to be there empathetically and right there with him. But I also think his background gave him a love for the nicer things too. And Barbara and Harvey built beautiful homes together in the Chicagoland area in Arizona, working with some of the most renowned architects. But what they filled their lives with was such joy and love and laughter. Holidays with whole extended Friedman family and Shabbat dinners with Harvey's parents and family trips all over, good friends that became like family and family who were everything to them. He loved his children beyond. And he would pile them up in his little two-seaters and take them with him everywhere, to the office, car shopping, lox and bagels every Sunday, never missing a Sunday Bears football game. He taught them how to persevere. He taught them how to love with abandon. He taught them to love life and cherish it, which he did all the days of his life. And I'll say that as we are remembering him and these children that he raised and these grandchildren whom he cherished, he got all of that love in return. Barbara doted on him, loved him, tried to be strict with him, and sometimes he paid attention to that. But mostly he still loved his Twizzlers and loved to enjoy them with his grandchildren. He had a special stash drawer. And really, these last years, they were by his side, and in these last days, they were by his side. Dana, you talked about the way in which Keith was with him, or Julie, you talked about the way that Keith was with him after his stroke. And really, that's exactly what his children did, John and Dana, by his side 24/7. Dana, you made a playlist for him so he could listen to his favorite music all the time. And really, you let John know what to say as soon as your dad woke up. If he did, it's okay to let go. And so you weren't ready. Nobody was ready to let him go. And still, John followed your advice. Dana, you had these last moments with him where he was awake and nodding and smiling at you. And Barbara, you were by his side through it all. Grandchildren were able to circle up and be with him. And he was ready to let go, not of life, but he trusted that we would keep him alive through our memories, that we would continue to share all the ways he brought beauty and goodness into our world and cherished moments with us. He loved people. He loved us. He made us better. And so we will remember him always. Beautiful, larger than life, caring, loving, smiling. So I invite you now to just cherish a memory, savor a moment. Think of a way in which he lit up when you walked into the room. Maybe the way in which he kissed your cheek. Maybe the way that he cheered you on in your life while still giving you a little guff. Find a way to be able to remember him so we bring his light into this world as long as we each have life. In that way, Zichrono Livracha, his memory will be an everlasting benediction.
Memories light the corner of my mind. Misty watercolored memories of the way we were. Scattered pictures of the smiles we left behind. Smiles we gave to one another of the way we were. Can it be that it was all so simple then? Or has time rewritten every line? If we have the chance to do it all again, tell me, would we? Could we? Memories may be beautiful and yet what's too painful to remember, we sometimes choose to forget. So it's the laughter we will remember whenever we remember the way we were.
His second favorite, Barbara. We invite you now, please rise for El Malay Rachamim, where we pray that Harvey's soul is bound up in everlasting life.
El Malay Rachamim shochen bamromim המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה. אם קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע המזהירים את נשמת הרשל בן ברל ואסתר לעולמו. בעל הרחמים יסירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. יצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר אמן.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Harvey Walner, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. Amen.
You may be seated for a moment. This concludes the service here at the chapel. The interment will take place at Memorial Park Cemetery in Skokie. The approximate driving time is 10 minutes. For those who will be going with the family to the cemetery, we ask that if your headlights and hazard lights on while in procession. We will be placing a magnetic flag on your vehicle. We also ask that you drive as close as safety permits to the vehicle in front of you. At the conclusion of the interment, the family will be going back to Bryn Mawr Country Club, where they'll be there until 8 p.m. this evening. The following individuals have been asked to act as pallbearers: Joey, Tony, Chase, Isabel, Tatum, Sarah, Dean, and Julie. And honorary pallbearers: Mickey Simon, Ron Friedman, Candy Spreckman, Cindy Chodakoff, and Steve Zeldin. If we can all rise and have the pallbearers and honorary pallbearers please come forward as we escort the family and the casket from the chapel. For those who are going to the cemetery, please go immediately to your vehicle so we can line up in procession. If you are not going to the cemetery, we ask that you leave the parking lot immediately so the procession can line up.